You.
All right, there you go. Daniel Perez, our public health reporter of the KUAM news team, with that interview of Dr. Nathaniel Berg, the Guam Board of Medical Examiners chairman. We'll get to your comments in a little bit, but first let's go ahead and get to the Speaker of the Guam Legislature, Speaker Therese Terlaje, who is the health chair. She has oversight of the Health Professionals Licensing Office and the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. Good morning, Madam Speaker.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Guam. What an interview that was. I'm not sure whether I'm shocked or I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and I guess we'll just start there, Madam Speaker. There was just a lot of stuff to unpack from that interview. So, just your reaction to the interview, and if you wanted to go through any of the points that Dr. Berg had raised, go ahead. You have the floor.
Overall, I want to say, all we did was what I believe is our job. And here in the legislature, we have only a couple powers. One is to write bills and appropriate and direct policy, and the other one is to conduct oversight and ensure that every agency, every board, every public official, can be held accountable. And we use our powers that way just to bring, openness to the procedures so that the public can understand, and so that we also in the legislature can understand where in the policy there may need to be changes. And so that's the purpose of the oversight, is to find out where there might need to be changes. And Chris, we did these oversights. This is not the first oversight that I've had over the Medical Licensing Board, but my oversights of this Medical Licensing Board might be the first oversights that the board has ever seen, ever. So, but we've done them because of multiple complaints. So this last oversight was directly because of multiple complaints by different people regarding, allegations that the board was not addressing their complaints promptly, that they were not giving to these complainants any kind of answers or responses, or we can't get to your complaint because of this or anything. And they were just not, there was no feedback given to them at all. And so we've actually seen complainants that have waited for years for any response from the boards. And then we know that in the interim, while these complaints are pending, licenses are continuing to be renewed. And for me, that's an issue, right? So we're continuing to renew licenses before we resolve these pending complaints. So do we know whether, those complaints are valid or not? And if they were valid, should that person be licensed? Those are absolutely, the job of the board. And I actually invited every single board member to come because I wanted to hear from every one of them to hear, and I wanted the public to hear from them, because I think it's important that, we're trying to establish trust between this licensing board and the community, where there's, allegations of, they may not be doing something enough. And so I wanted to hear from each of them to, explain their side as to, why they aren't acting promptly on some of these complaints, or what other impediment there was. And so we found out things during that hearing that I think were very important. And, first of all, we were able to discuss the timeline of some of the complaints. Some of them went back all the way to 2019, right? And I'm not judging, but I am definitely going to expose. And for me, I'll tell you personally, I don't find that acceptable, right? That we are going to continue to license people while the complaints are outstanding, especially complaints of sexual assault. We're not talking about complaints of overbilling, complaints of, something that maybe can be easily settled, but we're talking about, very serious allegations of criminal sexual conduct. And so I think those need to be resolved promptly. And we were so lucky that some of the victims were willing and able to come out and talk about it, because if they weren't, even I can't tell what those complaints are. They're confidential. They're only identified by number. And so I don't know which of the complaints are the ones that are pending the longest, except for these victims who have come and been, courageous enough to speak out about them. So I definitely found reasons for the boards to regroup and improve. And the Allied Health Board, who we also had an oversight of. Now, the Allied Health Board is composed of so many more different fields. It's so much more complex, I think, for them because of the different fields. but they are very actively responding with, new rules to determine how are they going to review the licenses of people who have allegations and other, not just allegations, but actions, adverse actions against them in other jurisdictions, how they are going to review those and what would be the criteria to allow them to be licensed here? What would be the conditions, right? They want to decide that in advance. They also are actively engaged in writing rules so that they can keep track of the timelines of these complaints, get back to the complainants, right, in a very timely fashion. And these, I'm looking for the medical licensing board to do the same. And I'm hoping that the doctors of our community are also going to, call their representatives on the medical licensing board and say, hey, that's not satisfactory. We can do better. And we should do better because it's a matter of trust between the doctors and the community, right? They want to know that these doctors, we can trust them. And that's the whole purpose of that law that was passed way before my time. It was passed by Senator Rodriguez at the time to put up on the website the records of these physicians that are being licensed on Guam. We're not putting up records of any other physicians in the world, only those that this board decides to license. That's who we want the records of. And we don't want their records from high school. We want their records from when they were practicing as a physician. And the statute's very clear as to what is required to be put on the website. It's, convictions because of your practice, right? Misdemeanors, felonies. And I think patients have the right to know that. And then I think it's called patients' right to know, or, it's patients' right to protect themselves, really, right? So they can decide when choosing a doctor whether they want to go to one that has multiple actions in different jurisdictions regarding sexual conduct or not, right? Don't you think that patient should have the right for that? I definitely think so. So no, I don't find this law that Dr. Berg was complaining about. And by the way, that's the first complaint I've heard about that law, because otherwise, for every other oversight, we've talked about this and they've talked about the progress they're making. They've talked about the RFPs that they've issued, how they had to get help for, some other website creator to help them with it and all of that. And we've tried to assist in that regard to facilitate them, access to their funds and access to, procurement of what they need. And so they have been successful. They've procured the website person. They've procured attorneys to have actual hearings on the complaints, but not a single hearing has actually occurred. But the procurements, they can't complain about not having the money because the medical licensing board has more money, I think, than any of the other boards. And their money is their fees. So whatever they charge their doctors to become licensed, that's what they get to use to, enforce the rules on these doctors. And, it's just, I don't know, Chris, yeah, it's kind of an overwhelming, I think it was, I don't know how to explain it, but that's kind of, that was a lot of things that Dr. Berg said in that interview. And I'm and he used my name quite a lot, but, I have utmost respect for these doctors and, what they do for our community. But those who serve on the licensing board, I believe have to answer to the people of Guam. They are doing a government service for us, yes. And they are volunteers, yes. I acknowledge that. But they've all sworn to do this. They've all volunteered to do this. They all know the job and how much time it's going to take. And I hope that they are all committed to doing that. And if, they have real issues and they need changes in policy, that they suggest those, because that's what, I'm going to work on now, seeing not whether to reduce the amount of information that's put on the website, but actually to increase it. Because of this issue we have now, is if you have an outstanding complaint, it can go on for years, and that person, according to our law, will continue to be licensed. Well, I have a problem with that if the board is not going to act on those complaints promptly. So we're going to try to address that.
Yeah, Madam Speaker.
I'm not trying to divide the community here. I don't think doctors should be divided from our community. I think they're part of our community, and they should stand for the same things that we stand for here in our community. And that is, we don't want to be patients to become victims. That's number one. That really is number one. We don't want that in any profession. Even Phil Flores, he's the vice chair of the Medical Licensing Board, and he is the only public representative on that board. The rest are all physicians. He also, he stayed to the end of the hearing, and I want to thank him for that. And he also, concurred, I thought, by the end of the hearing that, yes, we can do better in informing patients of our actions, and that, if we can act more promptly, then we should, and so I don't know. Yeah, Chris,
let me get in a speaker. So I watched the hearing. I watched this interview, and I don't know. I mean, from Dr. Berg complaining that the law requires the Guam Board of Medical Examiners to put on a website more information than any other jurisdiction in the world. I mean, from that to just calling the oversight hearing political, and I mean, it kind of seemed like he had an issue with every aspect of the law. So at what point do you kind of look at his chairmanship and maybe say that you don't have confidence in it? Because I don't think he said one word about resolving the patient complaints or really addressed any of the concerns that are brought up. I mean, he didn't even stay for the duration of the hearing. And so as a patient, Madam Speaker, when I look at this, I feel like it's an egregious abuse of the public's trust. When I listen to this interview and I hear how, I mean, it is what it is. I feel like it was a lot of excuses, and I didn't hear anything that reassured me or anybody who had a complaint before the board, because he didn't address any of those significant issues. So I mean,
well, I'm telling you, that interview that you just played is quite shocking. I'm shocked that is the response to an oversight hearing, right? To me, calling this personal attack on me because I, as the head of the Legislative Committee on Health, called an oversight hearing on the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. That's the type of response that we're going to get. I was trying to be accommodating of their time because they've brought so many issues. If I call a meeting or a hearing during any time of the day, so we put it at the time that they normally have their board meetings. We try to accommodate, them, and we gave them the questions in advance. My questions were very simple. What is your process to license people with, adverse determinations in other jurisdictions? Do you have any standards as to, when one person gets in or when one doesn't? I think they all have been getting in. I'm not sure, right? It's very hard for us to micromanage or to look at the details of their decision. So all I wanted was the policy. What policy are they using when they make that? And pretty much we found out it's up to every individual physician to just, while they're there, to determine whether they're going to allow this person or not. Then, we gave, like I said, we gave them every question. The other questions we gave them were data, right? How many cases, and their answers, or Dr. Berg's answers, the chairperson's answers, were, I found quite unacceptable. They were like, we don't know that number. You're going to have to ask the HBLO staff for that. And that HBLO staff, that's one thing I completely agree with Dr. Berg. They are hardworking individuals, and they are dealing with multiple boards, at least 11 boards, different health licensing boards, with all these complex personalities and, complex fields, but they are dealing with them. And I think they are doing their best, and they are trying to make order out of what in the past years has been, not order. This is the first time, I think, because of these oversights that I've been having, that we are actually, getting these boards to adjust the way they do things, to actually, hear the complaints during their meetings and give determinations as soon as possible. This is the only board that is saying, they can't do their job, if that's what Dr. Berg is saying. And that's why I really wanted to hear from the rest of the members to say, I believe that they are there in good faith and that they still believe that they can do their jobs. So, yeah, and these licensing boards, okay, so the way they're funded, we appropriate every year to public health, of course, and we allow public health to use its budget however it needs within its department. But we also specifically appropriate for the HPLO, the Health Professional Licensing Offices. And that money that we're appropriating to them is pretty much the fees that all these different boards have brought in, and they're allocated among each board by what they bring in. So like I said, the doctors board has the most money. They've not exhausted their funds. They still have funds available to them for whatever purpose they might find necessary. So I don't believe funding's an issue. Staffing may be an issue because if they are, see, when the boards are liable for things pursuant to the law, I don't find it acceptable that they say, oh, that's not my job. That's some other administrative staff's job. It's the board that is making the decision. It's the board that should be answerable to the people. And the staff, yes, they should do what the board needs to be done. But it's the boards that really need to answer. And that's all I am trying to do in my capacity. I feel like that's my job, right? I'm not going to sit around while complaints come into my office about, a board or, an agency not doing what it's supposed to do. And so I wanted to get to the bottom of that. And that's really the purpose. It's just to get to the bottom of it and how can we help? How can we fix it? And let them hear as well from these victims, because obviously the victims have never had an opportunity to go before these boards. So I wasn't sure if it was just the boards are not aware of how urgent this is for people in these actual situations, right? That these things get resolved. So in these particular recent cases of sexual misconduct, I think I'm glad the victims were willing to come forward, because that urgency in their voice is really what all of us need to hear.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, Madam Speaker, with the oversight hearing, and then even going back to Dr. Berg's testimony on Bill 112, I mean, if you just, anybody, and that's why I play this interview, is because you're right. I feel like I want the public to hear this. I mean, it is what it is. I just play it. It's his words. We played the clips from the oversight hearing. His words, but just going back to even his testimony in Bill 112, I mean, the takeaway I got, and you guys heard the interview yourselves, the takeaway I got was that there doesn't really seem, Dr. Berg doesn't really seem to be passionate about holding his colleagues accountable. And I think the proof is in the pudding when you look at the GBME and whether or not they are doing their job. I think we can all agree that they're not. I mean, even up to today. So when I asked you the first question to respond to the interview, you said that your job was to hold these oversights and to make determinations about what types of fixes you can make in policy. So are we anticipating any policy fixes in the form of maybe some bills that you're going to introduce relative to the GBME?
Yes, I actually am working on some bills. And like I said, one of them is going to be, to address this gap. There's a huge gap between we're not allowed to publish any complaints, right? Yet these complaints can linger for 3-4 years, right? No way, that can't be acceptable. And in the interim, they continue to be licensed. So that combination of things, I think something there needs to change. It's either you address the complaint and then you renew their license, or you, at least publish the complaint so that people will know that this licensed physician actually has an outstanding sexual assault complaint, right? And of course, we're trying to, I think the policy was to keep these confidential until it's like innocent until proven guilty. I believe in that, but I just think we can't hold off on the trials, right? We need a determination. That's how justice is brought. That's how justice is brought, particularly to victims, right? And so I just think, I'm just hoping the board, will bring, other, well, we look at it after the hearing, but I'll tell you what bothers me. After that hearing that we had, the next meeting, my staff attends some of these board meetings whenever we can, just to keep tabs on what's going on. And so my staff's reporting to me that they were actually discussing removing the list of complaints from their agenda so that the legislature can't keep track of how many complaints there are outstanding and what years those complaints were filed. And for that to be the response after the oversight hearing, you know, I'm, I don't even want to use words. That is kind of, I don't find that the correct response. But, these boards, they're independent of my interference. They are making their decisions on their own. I am trying to direct the policy. I'm trying to show what they're doing. I'm trying to show to them as well how the public feels. And so I'm just trying to I feel like we can all, do better, and that we should. And anyways, that's something I'm going to be following up on.
Okay. There's the last question, Madam Speaker, and just going back to Bill 112. During the hearings for that, right, the doctors there was a common thread. They said, don't do this. All the doctors are going to leave Guam. It's going to make
They said, they pleaded,
So they pleaded that
they were very sincere. And I totally believe that they were sincere. And they said, let us handle it. We will handle it early on. We will take care of these patients, and we will take good care of them. And if they are not satisfied with something, or something went wrong, allow us to take care of them first. Don't give it to a magistrate. They told me, don't, do this, don't do that. And, so I am looking for these doctors. And that's why I'm hoping that, some other doctors in our community are also going to use their voices in this situation, because I know,
but no, the point I wanted to make, Madam Speaker, was these doctors, they pleaded, you're right, they seem very sincere. Let
us govern ourselves.
Right. And so this GBME is supposed to be the doctors governing themselves, and clearly I would just say it looks like a total failure. So what does that mean with Bill 112? If the doctors said we're going to police ourselves, and so are we thinking about reintroducing that, or does that even come into play?
It's still in committee, and so what I promised was we're going to have another hearing on it, and I am going to incorporate as many of the suggestions as I feel are reasonable, that they are consistent with the intent. And so we're going to do that, of course, have another hearing, and hopefully be able to move on that soon, together with these other bills that I'm introducing.
Okay. Well, thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. Take care.
There you go. Speaker Therese Terlaje. The interview, it's a link exclusive. You got it here with Dr. Nathaniel Berg. Let's get into some of the comments here, guys. But I would just say that going back to that Bill 112, you guys remember just some of the orchestration that went into it with the doctors, and there was even one point where a doctor had stood up. There was a couple of them, and said that they were going to do their best to make sure that the Speaker Terlaje and senators who supported this measure, they would campaign against them, basically. And so I would just say that if the doctors had come out of that hearing and said, let us take care of ourselves, and the GBME is the main way that these doctors can police themselves, because there's only one member of the public on there, and that's not happening, what does that then mean? I don't know, though, but if I was a good doctor, and there are so many good doctors on this island, and I heard this interview from Dr. Berg, and I watched that hearing about the GBME, I would be freaking right now. Because Dr. Berg, when you talk about the speaker saying that we need to restore trust, or even look at the amount of trust that the public has in the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, if you just look at the facts of everything, I would say that there's very little trust that the public has in the GBME. And so if I was a good doctor hearing these things that Dr. Berg is saying, I would freak. I would start coming out and speaking out against it, or, maybe pull Dr. Berg to the side, because at this point, I'm really surprised that there isn't a petition circulating to remove Dr. Berg as the Guam Board of Medical Examiners chairman, just because you would expect more from a chairman. Like, when I listened to that interview, I felt like I was listening to the interview of just a regular member of the board. But he is the chairman, the titular head of that board, whose responsibility is to carry out all of the mandates that the Guam Board of Medical Examiners has to carry out, which includes accepting, addressing, investigating patient complaints. And that, to me, is the biggest thing that they have to do. And patients are filing complaints. They're not getting the time of day. Their complaints are getting lost. Right? And like